The over-20s took note of my defensive posture as they approached. Thunra raised an eyebrow as if he was confused by my reaction, but the rest avoided eye contact. Instead, their eyes rested in tactical positions, where they could see if I made a sudden move, a very unfortunate indication of where their thoughts were. "How's he doing?" Yishith asked gingerly. "I've cast healing, but that fight had to have taken a lot out of him," Yulk answered, as he turned to look at them. "I cannot begin to imagine what you must be thinking about this turn of events, nor do I care. I want to make one thing absolutely clear. If you attempt to harm this boy, we will be required to defend him." "But why?" Joni asked, shocked. "He is our brother," I said. "Adopted, no less. To take one into our family and not defend them to the death? You'd have never heard of our clan if we were capable of such an act." "He's right. The Alta clan's serious about that kind of thing," Thunra added. "Your words are wiser than you know," Yulk said with a malicious grin. "If you attack us, you'll likely win, but then you'll have to walk out of here without us. Once you do that, our entire clan will become your sworn enemies. Those who can't fight you will find ways to ruin your life until those who can fight you are able to end it." I struggled to keep my face stoic and not show the relief washing over me. I had completely forgotten about that. Clan Alta handles family matters internally and does not abide outside interference. It's a right granted to us by the many sovereigns in our debt, including the High Chief. There's exceptions, like preventing a clanmate from actively committing murder, but generally speaking, only members of Clan Alta are allowed to kill other clanmates. I continued to stare at the over-20s with a stony expression. Maitri sighed and then laughed. "Even if we win, we lose. Well, thankfully I like the boy enough to leave him to your judgment." "He could be very dangerous," Joni added hesitantly. "So can we," Thunra countered. "Plus, and I don't want to admit it, he probably saved our asses." "That was the machine in his head," Yisith said. "I fought alongside him for a bit there. His expression never changed, and he was fighting like a pro. Even the dumb moves were efficient. There's no way a level 5 can fight like that. Even if he were innately talented to that degree, he would have picked up enough skills by now to be at least level 10. "What does it matter?" I asked. "The facts are laid before you, plain as day. You are powerful adventurers capable of great good, but this decision is not yours to make. If the boy does become dangerous, our clan will handle it. But if you fight us here, you will die regardless of the outcome." "He's right, Yisith. You won't have my support in this," Matri said. "And I'll kick your ass if you try anything," Thunra joined in. "Might as well, since I'll die if I let you kill them." Yisith looked at her companions. Matri and Thunra stared into her, but Joni's eyes were glued firmly to the floor. She turned to me and met my gaze. "That's gotta be the most eloquent way that I've ever been told to know my place," she said sourly. "But fine, no harm will come to Nick by my hands." "Nor mine," Joni added, still staring at the ground. "Well, glad that's settled then," Yulk said as Nick began to stir. The boy opened his eyes and looked at us with confusion apparent on his face. He held his head with one hand and used the other to try to stand up. Seeing he was a little shaky, Yulk helped him stand. "What happened?" Nick asked. "Your mechanical what's-it won the day," Thunra answered with a grin. "We might have pulled through without you, but it would have been a damned close thing. I don't remember any of it. I remember a terrible scream and then waking up just now. I was fighting?" "Yes, you were," Yulk answered. "I believe that was thanks to your artificial intelligent guide." Nick looked even more confused before everything seemed to click into place. He stared into the middle distance, his frown deepening every few moments. It took me a moment to realize he was probably talking to Ten. "Okay, I get it now. Ten said that its analysis of the creature determined that if I fought it, I would have died. As a self-defense measure, he knocked me out and took control of my motor functions," Nick explained. "Apparently, he told me that he'd have to knock me out to move me around earlier, but I must have missed it in all the excitement." "I wonder if it can learn new skills for you while you're unconscious," Joni muttered to himself. Everyone turned to look at the sorcerer, who immediately looked back to the floor. Joni's a clever one. I'd never have thought of that. I turned to look at Nick, who was now also staring at the floor. 10 says no, Nick said. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's saying that skills are linked to your subconscious, and its ability to interact with that part of my brain is limited. It can activate skills that I've learned, though. Well, this is all very interesting, but we've beaten the boss, Matri said. We should start heading back, right? Well, these three came with us for a reason. Might as well explore a bit more, Yesith replied. Much as I hate to say it, we should also make sure there aren't more of this thing running around. It's a human, Nick said softly. Or it was. Something changed it, twisted it into that monster. We all stared at the corpse in a somber silence. How would I have felt if it had been an orc? I don't know for sure, but I doubt I'd have felt good about it. After a moment, Nick looked up at us and sighed. Then he turned his attention to his surroundings and found the basket guard of his sword. Then he sighed again. Damn it, he said, hefting the basket guard turned knuckle duster. We'll find a job that'll get you a new one, Yulk chuckled. Maybe it can be repaired, I added. That's usually cheaper. Let me grab the blade. I jogged over to where the blade of the sword had fallen. There were 3 blades on the ground, but the one that was Nick's was obvious. His was the single-edged blade. The other 2 were double-edged with an exaggerated point. I paused and stared at them for a moment. Even broken, I was able to recognize the short swords I'd been bugging Kirasaka about. Fuck, I whispered to myself, as a wave of grief swept over me. I already knew he was dead. He would have been teleported to the dungeon entrance otherwise. It was foolish, childish even, to think that he could have survived. Nevertheless, a small part of me had been holding out hope that he was still alive. Seeing the swords that he obsessed over in this condition left no doubt of what happened to him, and crushed my hopes of seeing him again for good. I took out my rag and gathered all 3 blades, and looked around for the Kirasaka's grips. Once I found them, I gathered them too, and rejoined the group. Yulk's face fell in sympathy as he saw what I was holding. I'm sorry, Nash, he said. It's all right. At least I didn't actually have to pry them from his cold, dead hands, I joked softly. The rest of the group was silent as I stuffed the broken weapons into my pack. Who knows? Maybe I'll find someone who can fix them. I'm not one to use the weapons of the dead, but I could mount them as a keepsake to remember Kirasaka by or something. Once I finished packing, I turned back to the others. Let's get going, I said. We started by exploring the chamber we were in, which may have been a mistake. There had been a certain stench of death permeating throughout the chamber, but once we began exploring the walls, it nearly became overpowering. There were random bones and pieces of meat strewn about the deeper corners. Most of the bones were obviously orcish, but some of them were different. Monsters, rodents, and... These are human bones. Nick finished my thought. The teeth were the giveaway. Flat teeth mixed with sharpened teeth were a dental pattern I'd only ever seen in Nick's mouth until today. I gingerly picked up one of the skulls. It was very old. The pieces of flesh that clung to it were as hard as stone, like jerky left out in the sun for a year. Since there was no sun down here, it must have been in this condition for a very, very long time. They've got gnaw marks on them, Yulk said. These were meals for the monster. I wonder if it killed them, or if they died naturally, and it ate them after. It's hard to tell. The bones are scattered around, and the rest of the human bones look too much like orc bones. Or maybe the only bones left are the skulls, Joni added. These bones weren't put here in reverence, though. This is essentially a trash pile, so I doubt the monster cared about them. Maybe he lost his sanity because he had to resort to cannibalism, Nick suggested. He was trapped in here for who knows how long. If he really was altered, he couldn't have always been a monster. Well, we'll probably never know, Yulk said. Let's move on. We left the gory sight behind and found an exit to the chamber we were in. The darkness seemed to get deeper the further we went, and I suddenly noticed that we were all moving silently. I guess the others are having the same thought I am. What if there's another one further in here? We encountered several turns until we finally found a light at the end of the passage. We quickened our pace until we entered the room the light was coming from. It took me a moment to realize we were in a library, filled with shelves holding many leather-bound tomes. "Excellent," Yulk said. "A repository of knowledge. Perhaps we'll have our answers at last." I picked up one of the books and jumped back as dust poured from its cover. Yulk and I shared a confused look, and he picked up another book with similar results. "Oh, come on," Nick muttered. "I guess these tomes weren't cared for very well," Joni said. "It would seem the years have not been kind to them." "Let's see if there's anything useful," Yulk added. We began to search the books for anything that was still legible. Most of the pages that weren't dust were too faded to read, and the ones that weren't faded were unhelpful diagrams of plant life that none of us had ever seen before. There were piles of dust and leather-bound covers scattered across the floor by the time we were done. "There isn't even another exit from this room," Thunra said. "I think we've found what we're going to find, folks." "I agree. Let's start heading back," Ysith replied. As she said that, a familiar glow surrounded us. Nick was the only one of us who looked alarmed as the glow turned into a blinding light. Once the light faded, I opened my eyes to the sight of the dungeon entrance. There were other groups of adventurers scattered around us. Some of these adventurers looked a bit ragged, a telltale sign of having delved rather deep. Others looked annoyed at the shift, probably because they hadn't found any loot yet. "Well, that's convenient," Matri said. "Oh, good. My feet were beginning to hurt," Joni added with a small laugh. "Let's go see the chief," I said. As a group, we exited the dungeon and headed for the chief's. The library had been a bust, but we'd found 3 very important clues. The writing on the altar things, 10 is the voice in Nick's head, and the monster had been a human at some point, but something had twisted it into a thing of madness. I suppose the other human remains could also be considered a clue. I rubbed my forehead as we walked to try to make sense of it all. The writing was likely Drakon, according to the 2 sorcerers. 10 couldn't understand the writing, which means he probably doesn't speak Drakon. But he does speak Gon, which is a much older language. Is 10 male or female or neither? Doesn't really matter. Anyways, the human remains indicated that the monster had eaten them. Did those remains belong to people that the monster knew? Were they the ones who modified the thing? Also, and I can't believe this didn't occur to me before, why wasn't the entire hidden part of the dungeon dark? Why didn't the monster try to leave the dungeon before? What if the monster and the other humans had been trapped in the dungeon together? What had the monster eaten after it ran out of humans? Maybe it wasn't able to die from starvation, but could still feel hungry. That would definitely drive me insane. Nevertheless, the information we managed to obtain resulted in more questions without giving us many answers in return. "Hey, Gluhern, you old so-and-so!" Thunra shouted as we entered the chief's chambers. "Thunra, I see you all survived. Welcome back. How'd it go?" Gluhern asked with a grin. I looked at the 2 incredulously. I hadn't been aware that they were acquainted. I guess it kind of makes sense. They're both brawlers, and I think they're from roughly the same part of the chiefdom. It's a small world. "Well, it was a close thing," Ysith said. "Turns out the monster was much stronger than we thought it was." "Yep, at least one of us would have died if it hadn't been for Nick," Matri added. "Maybe all of us." Chief Gluhern slowly turned to glare at Yulk and I. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't I say not to take part in the fight?" he asked with a dangerous tone. "No, you said you'd prefer if Nick didn't," Yulk started to say before he had to dodge a goblet. "That was rhetorical, sorcerer." "We've got nothing to apologize for, Chief," I said. "We made our decision based on the information that was available to us at the time, and it turned out to be the right decision." Gluhern looked at me with fire in his eyes, but when he saw that I wasn't trying to egg him on like Yulk had been, the fire died out. He gave a big sigh. "Fine," he said. "Tell me what happened." "So, without Yulk, Nash, and Nick there, we'd have bit the dust, probably," Thunra said. Joni definitely would have. Ysith and Thunra had caught Chief Gluhern up to speed. and it even provided a tactical analysis of the fight with the monster. The part of the story that I hadn't been awake for had me a little stunned. I hadn't quite believed 10 when he said that my brain was holding my body back. Intellectually, I knew it was true, because I had heard the same thing from my weightlifting coach in fitness class. But fighting against my own mind had only ever resulted in 1 or 2 extra reps. To hear about how my body fought that monster without me in control was something else entirely. Could I do that without 10, now that I know? Could I push myself to those extremes? Maybe with training, but it feels unlikely. What do I do if I encounter another enemy like that? Then there's the matter of losing control of my body. I'm not exactly comfortable with it, and not just because it hurt like hell when I woke up. Like I'd done a super intense workout without stretching or hydrating or taking any breaks. But what if the reason that guy turned into a monster is because he also had an AI assistant, and it permanently took control of him? Come to think of it, can 10 read my mind when I'm not thinking at it? I waited a moment to see if 10 would reply to that. Nothing. It could just be playing coy, though, not wanting to feed into my apparent paranoia. There's no way that I'd be able to tell. "So, what do you think we should do, Chief?" Matri asked, snapping me back to the matter at hand. "Well, you 4 can head back to the High Chief at your leisure to collect your reward. Feel free to rest in the village and maybe spend some coin while you're at it." Gluhern chuckled slyly. "Nash, Nick, and Yulk, unsurprisingly, you've been summoned by Ulermak. You'll be heading to the capital with the next trade caravan. It leaves tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning? Nick doesn't have a weapon, and my axe is damaged," Nash said. "We'll need to see a smith to get back up to combat readiness, and it's going to take them more than a night to fix our gear." Wait, Nash didn't fight the creature. "How'd your axe get damaged?" I asked. "Never you fucking mind, boy," Nash growled. "He whacked it on the pod after it sealed you inside," Yulk said with a grin. "You know, kinda like what he told you not to do with the wall." We all had a bit of a laugh at Nash's expense. He didn't laugh with us. Instead, his expression remained stoic with a touch of anger. Once the laughter died down, Gluhern sighed. "I'm not at liberty to give you more time. Ulermak wants you in his presence as soon as possible, and I'm honor-bound to comply," he pointed out. "As are you." "What if the caravan comes under attack?" Yulk asked. "It has its own guards, I'd imagine," Thunra answered. "Plus, I'll come along. I ain't gonna need more than a night's sleep to recover, and I got nothing to buy except maybe a keepsake. We can train when the caravan takes its breaks." Nash grinned, and the lingering smile I had at the thought of his mishap faded rapidly. Nash is huge compared to me, but Thunra is downright mountainous. Even if I just mimicked his workout routine, it would probably result in an injury. And I've got no doubts as to what Nash is currently thinking. "I like that idea, Thunra," Nash said with a certain malice in his tone. "I'll bring along the wooden weapons. We'll have the boy up to level 10 in no time." I looked to Yulk for help, but he just softly shrugged. "I'll be coming along as well," Matri said. "I could probably use a rest, but I want to get paid as soon as possible. Got some gear upgrades in mind." Yisith and Joni also voiced their intentions to travel with us, but I was spiraling into a state of depression and anxiety at the thought of the pain that was waiting in my near future. At least if things got too bad, Yulk would be there to heal me up. "You seem to be anxious about sparring with Thunra," Ten said. "You don't need to be. I'll make certain he doesn't critically injure you." "Actually, the thought of that makes me even more anxious," I hastily replied. "I'd rather remain in control of my body, regardless of the consequences to my physical well-being." "I'm sorry, Nick. I can't comply with that desire. Keeping you alive is my highest priority," Ten explained. "Plus, if you die, I die. I don't want to die. And I don't want you hurting my friends and potentially turning me into that monster," I said. "If you take over and harm Thunra, then what happens if Nash and Yulk try to stop you?" Ten paused for a moment, seemingly contemplating the point I had just made. "I understand your concern. I am confident that I will not have to utilize lethal force against the orcs if I am forced to intervene. I'll be gentle, as it were. Also, I feel I should clarify that the altered human was not being controlled by an artificial intelligence. It had a module, but the module was in standby mode, similar to your own before you re-entered the dungeon. All right then, the plans are made. Good journeys, Chief Gluehorn said. We parted ways with the chief, and I followed along after Nash and Yulk somewhat mindlessly. What do you mean the module was in standby mode like mine? I asked Ten. Your AI module was in standby mode before I was activated. In standby mode, the module is able to automatically translate spoken languages and rapidly heal a subject back to the state it was in prior to the installation of the module. So the monster understood us and attacked anyway? If it had the proper language packs, yes, although I doubt it could have made sense of it. Judging by its hyper-predatory attack patterns, I'd say it was quite feral. I corrected. Wait, hold on. When you say rapidly heal a subject back to the state it was in prior to having the module installed, what exactly does that entail? The module is able to automatically detect grievous damage to a subject and utilize a nanite package to correct said damage. Given enough time and resources, it can even regenerate lost limbs. But does it restore everything back to its original state? 'Cause Yulk healed me and my scar got smaller, and I think he healed me to wake me up. The module has a fail-safe that prevents it from undoing natural healing. So if it were installed in someone that had already been injured, they'd be able to heal on their own and the module wouldn't interfere. This, apparently, also applies to magical healing. That's not in the K-base, but I suppose it makes sense. The module measures your current state with that of an average human body to determine whether or not to make a correction. It can even prevent a subject from aging while in stasis. One concern alleviated, only for more to pop up. Okay, 2 things. First, does that make me effectively immortal? And if that's the case, does that mean there's no way to determine how long the altered human and I were in the dungeon? I asked. You're highly resistant to the rigors of time, but sufficient damage to your body or my module will kill you. Also, the aging prevention doesn't work nearly as efficiently once the subject is active, so no, you're not immortal, Ten answered. But yes, that does mean that any attempt to estimate the amount of time you or the altered human were in the dungeon would be asinine without further data. Whether or not the altered human entered stasis or how often it did so, for instance. So I'll most likely outlive Nash and Yulk if we're not killed by monsters. Well, given our age difference, that was probably going to be the case anyway. Wait, how old do orcs live to be? No, not the time for those questions. Is there anything else I should know about this nanite package and healing ability thing? Yes, I am in full control of the nanite package. Since you are young, to foster proper muscle growth, I'll only be able to use it to heal actual injuries. What? Why? Rapid healing of muscular microtears can result in gross disfigurement if not properly managed, and in your case, it is beyond my capability to manage properly. How is it beyond your capability? I asked incredulously. Your body is still growing, so both your body and I would be rapidly trying to heal the microtears. If we both succeed, then after a while, your muscles would become disproportionate and disfigured, Ten explained. I would have to stop your natural healing processes, which is difficult even without the growth hormones at play, before I took action to heal the microtears. With larger injuries, I can simply pile on to what the body is already doing, but the smaller the injury, the harder it is to correctly time my actions. So long story short, that's why I'm still sore. Ten paused again. Yes, I'm sorry that I pushed you so hard. That's all right, I said as we arrived at the house. We lived. That's what matters. Welcome home, boys, Yilda called from the kitchen. At least that better be my boys. If not, more food for Dima. I looked at Yulk and asked, do you guys have people invading your home a lot? Not a lot. But we do get the occasional assassin or person with a grudge against our clan. Yulk gave me a toothy smile. Yeah, but ain't nobody tougher than Mama Alta, Nash added as we entered the kitchen. I remember when I was 6 and I saw her kill an assassin with her slipper, took his head right off, and it wasn't even sharpened or anything. Hush now, there's no need for that talk, Yilda said as I was trying to figure out if Nash was joking or not. How'd it go in the dungeon? Did you find any answers? Not any satisfying ones. We made a copy of the language that was on the altars that Nash found Nick on, Yulk answered. I think they're in Dracon. Want to take a look? Sure, she said, as Yulk handed her some papers. She held them at an angle and looked down her nose at them, pursing her lips slightly. She squinted for a while and then raised one of her eyebrows. This isn't Dracon. It's close, though, she explained. A lot of the characters are the same, but they're in a different order. I'd guess that it's High Dracon. Nash and I looked at each other with confused expressions, but Yulk looked shocked. She handed the papers back to him and continued cooking. What's High Dracon? I asked. Well, Dracon is the language of those subservient to the High Dragons back when they were into governing, Yilda answered. High Dracon is the sacred language of those High Dragons and their chosen elite. Wait, what? Nash asked while glaring accusingly at Yulk. How come you didn't tell me about that? It wasn't relevant to your studies, Yulk replied softly. There's a lot of languages that we don't have much chance of encountering, and High Dracon is one of those. It's been thousands of years since the High Dragons held kingdoms. 15,000 or so since the biggest kingdoms fell apart. But there's still a High Dragon ruling Bolasir. Well, ruling is a strong word, Yilda said with a chuckle. It's been asleep for going on 1,300 years. Bolasir's by far and large considered an elven kingdom now. Huh? Nash and Yulk replied in unison as I remembered an argument they had while I was still in the hospital. What do you mean, huh? Boys, Bolasir is just over the Dragon Jaw Mountains. You should know this, she scolded. Why do you think it's called Dragon Jaw and not Orc Jaw? Wait, I thought that the dragon had been asleep for 100 years, Yulk sputtered. And I thought they tamed it, Nash stammered. And it was just a dragon, not a high dragon. Wrong on both counts. The High Dragon in Bolasir came into power about 18,000 years ago, fought in the Cataclysm Wars, and went to sleep right after the war ended. Hells, you step foot in Bolasir and they'll chat your damned ears off about it. But the history book Yulk read to me, Nash said. History book? Yulk asked. Wait, do you mean The Adventures of Milamaman? Yeah. Oh, no, that was fiction. Sorry, I should have clarified. Okay, so wait, I interjected as Nash's face dropped. 2 questions. First, what's the difference between a high dragon and a dragon? Second, would this high dragon be able to read the text? High dragons are both much smarter and much larger than dragons. They can also do magic, whereas dragons just have a breath weapon, Yulk answered. And yeah, it would probably be able to read the text, assuming that the text is High Dracon and we can wake it up. And that it's not illiterate, Nash added. Yulk and I glanced at him to see if he was joking. He wasn't. There's a chance that one of the elves in Bolasir can read High Dracon. After all, a High Dragon is technically their king, Yilda said. Either way, you're going to need a visa and permission from the High Chief. Well, thankfully, we're on our way to the capital in the morning to speak to the High Chief, Nash said. Hopefully we can convince him to let us go to Bolasir. Yilda turned away from the stove to look at us. You're on the road again so soon? She asked sadly. Afraid so, Mom. Got the summons right out of the dungeon, Nash said softly. Damn. Well, I guess that's that. You tell Ulermak I'm not happy about this. I should get some time to spend with my boys in my golden years, damn it. I'll let him know, Nash said with a grin. So what's for dinner?